Hi, welcome back. We're doing another Star Wars The Old Republic video. Don't mind the background, that's just there for some fun. I like highlighting some of the drone photography that I do for the hell of it. So anyways, what am I doing today? I'm going to be doing Objective Meridian on the Republic side. This is a run I did a while ago with just a random group from Flashpoint through Activity Finder. And I'll just show you what Master Mode tanking looks like on Objective Meridian. And we'll walk through some of the mechanics of the different fights, some of the things to do. So yeah, let's get out of the nice ocean views here and let's get into Star Wars. Alright, so Objective Meridian, as you're probably already aware, is a level 75 flashpoint, so this one you are not scaled, so it makes it a little bit harder. You do need to have the appropriate stats to go in here, or you're going to find that you're going to be performing at a much lower level than other players who've tiered properly. Generally, I would advise this one you do need all the rolls. I don't really think you can cheese this one with playing without a tank or without a healer like some of the other master modes. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit on some of the trash clearing because it gets a bit boring. So just as a guardian tank, it's a bit challenging to make sure you keep up all that AoE threat on everything around you, but I think I was able to do it pretty well. So we're running into the first boss room. A lot of people do struggle with the first boss because just never taking the time to learn the mechanics, not knowing what to do, so on. There's two bosses here. The general idea is that you want to kill both of them equally. So ideally you want to burn both of them down, kill them at the exact same time, or very close to the exact same time within 10 seconds of each other. A little bit of light enrage isn't too bad, but you don't want to have a heavy enrage. Now, generally what I like to do as a tank is I like to take the Spider Walker, and then the two-legged walker is usually something that I say one of the two DPS should take. So there should be a DPS on each of them. The thing that is important, and I'm just explaining to the group right now, is that we're going to want to make sure that we're doing interrupts on the two-legged walker to prevent him from, I forget exactly which attack it is, but there's one of the attacks you want to interrupt, and that just makes it a lot easier. There's a lot less mechanics to deal with, a lot less outgoing damage. I'm going to skip a fair bit ahead. Generally as a tank, it's really easy if you have a ranged player on the Spider Walker with you, and then if you have a melee, you want to put them on the two-legged walker. Now, if both your players are ranged, not a big deal. If both your players are melee, it's just going to be a little bit annoying. So, all these fire circles that go down, you can interrupt. I believe this is one of the interruptible channels from the two-legged walker. To prevent those from going down. But just as a tank, you're just going to have to be very aware of how you're placing those circles and leaving room for a melee DPS to also be hitting the boss at the same time that you're tanking it. So, as you can see, generally when I try and place these, that's what I'm thinking about doing. I'm trying to stack those circles as close as I can while getting out of them myself. And I'm trying to always make sure that the boss isn't standing completely in a circle. That way, if there was a melee DPS, they'd still be able to hit the boss. Now, this would be an example of which way not to go. There I would have, potentially fried my melee DPS with a circle. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you just gotta, do what you do, right? Otherwise, the fight's fairly straightforward. Your DPS should be occasionally checking the health of each enemy just to make sure that, they're burning them down pretty close to equally. As you can see, I leapt back there just to get an extra interrupt for the hell of it. There's nothing to interrupt on the spider boss. Just deal with, running out of stuff. The way that the circles go down, you don't want to stand in them for very long. Generally, I just move the whole time. And that way you're already moving by the time the circle becomes static and drops behind, and you're taking very little damage. So there's a lot of different mechanics on bosses where it is preferable for you to actually be moving constantly when you have something under your feet, and other fights, it's going to change colors, or when it's going to drop and you have enough time to get out of it, that you actually want to be standing in the spot you want to drop it, wait, and then you see that change happening. As you can see, I'm just going over to this other guy to try and do a few interrupts while that fire is coming out, especially if he's sitting inside of a circle. So I'm like, I don't want to stand in somewhere taking unnecessary damage. It can be stressful on your healer depending on how skilled they are at healing. Fight can be quite a bit of outgoing damage. So yeah, when there's no spot for me to melee, I quite often go to the other boss interrupt, or of course just during the flamethrower. I don't do that much damage as a tank, it's not critical, so it's nice to just try and get off a couple extra interrupts to help. So yeah, we cleared the boss, now we're just doing some trash. There are some shortcuts you can take in here to skip some trash, some jumping over rubble, different stuff like that. So in these spots here, there's actually a bit of a shortcut that a lot of times you can go up the ramp, green's the top right, and you can usually run through those enemies that are fighting each other without them doing aggro on you. So if you just go up the ramp and run real fast right through them, most of the time nothing will aggro on you, and you get to run through this room. Now, I don't know what happened. I think 3 of us had already gone through those enemies without aggro, and the 4th guy pulled aggro somehow. I'm not sure what happened. I wasn't paying too much attention. Alright, so I believe this is actually the bonus boss area that we're going to jump down to. The bonus boss, especially on the Republic side, I haven't tried this on Imperial side yet, is brain dead easy. There's really no mechanics. I really feel like the first boss and the last boss are definitely the most challenging out of them. This boss here, I just try and hold threat on both of them. I've never had an issue. I don't know if there's any specific mechanics to be aware of, and it has never led to an issue. So obviously it's a bit challenging when people are attacking both bosses instead of burning Lord Fang to keep threat on both, but you just do the best you can. You know, some occasional AoE taunts, single taunting, alternating between the 2 bosses. A really good strategy with tanking when you need to hold 2 things is most of your DPS should be on one boss, and then your taunt should be on the other boss. Because generally you can hold enough threat just by putting all of your attacks on a single boss, and then the taunt allows you to build additional threat lead over who currently has the highest threat on the other enemy. So yeah, it'll go to the other players a little bit here and there, but then when you taunt back, you get that buffer. As long as that boss has already walked away from you and he's more than 4 meters away, you're going to get a 30% threat bonus over who currently has the highest threat. So it gives you a bit of a buffer. You're going to hold the boss for a while on top of the length of the 6-second taunt, and then that just starts amplifying itself. The longer the fight goes on, the higher the amount of threat that's total out there, so that 30% bonus of threat when they walk away from you is going to be even larger, and it's going to be much easier to hold them. And then you can start adding in some of your AoE damage to your rotation, and that allows you to build that threat a bit higher. And potentially now, with the combination of your AoE taunt, you're never going to have to worry about running out. So yeah, as I said, this fight, super easy. Yeah, run out of the purple circles. There's some obvious stuff. So I'll run through a little bit more trash after going up the elevator. Again, there's, you know, a spot here and there where you can skip stuff. We're going to go skip all that. So now we're on to the 3rd boss, or the 2nd boss, if you don't count the bonus boss. This one, I've never actually figured out the purpose of any of his mechanics. He's got a few mechanics, and they just don't seem to matter or make much sense. It's very odd how the first boss actually can be quite challenging, and yet now they're not. So you can see I've got the red circle under my feet, so it's just dropping stuff on the floor, move around, try and pick up some enemies as I go. That snipe, I don't know if you can body block it as a tank. That might be something worth experimenting with and trying. I've never actually taken the time to figure out if I can go in there, stand in that line of sight, and prevent the damage on my teammates. It just doesn't do enough damage to matter. You can see everybody's health is still very high. It's very easy to heal through. So, as you can see, there we go. I tried body blocking it. Looks like it actually did something. So, yeah. Not looking in detail. Now, if you really want to know if it's doing something, you know, having fly text on to see if other people are taking damage would help a lot. Or, you know, looking through your combat logs on Star Parcels makes a difference. But as you can see, it seems like, oh, that time it seems to hit him as well. So, no, seems like I was wrong about the whole body blocking idea. It just seems like it's stupid to stand inside of it and both of you get hit. That was really nice of him to push the ads in for me, so that I could taunt everything, get them grouped up better for damage, for AoE. So, you can't hold all the ads that come out here. It's just not going to happen. So, it's one of those things, don't worry about it. See this little mechanic here? They give you those DPS symbols. They show you this thing here. I've tried figuring out how that works. I got no freaking clue what it does, if it does anything, and it just seems pointless. You know, like, I have done this operation like 5 times and still have no freaking clue why it keeps doing that, why it shows that item, what it actually is doing. So, really confusing. If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments down below, because it's bugging the hell out of me that they make it look obvious, like it's going to do something, and I've yet to figure out what it actually does or if it's actually useful. I can't, you know, I've been watching my buffs and my debuffs, trying to figure out if things are happening there and seeing if the boss's attacks change, and I just can't get it. So the rest of this fight is pretty easy. It's simply rinse and repeat. There's not too much to know there. And then Malgus is the real main meat and bones of this. There's quite a few different mechanics to be aware of, but there's a few things that make this fight really easy to do. So the first thing is going to be the tanking position. So I'm going to tank him with my back against an object on the edge, so that way he can't actually knock me off when he has his knockback. So there's a couple times where your taunt timing has to be very, very tight that you need to be aware of to make sure he doesn't do knockback on other people. So he's going to swap targets. So right here off this part, see this purple circle is the one where he does the knockback. So you want to be very careful. He's going to do a threat drop. He's going to swap to another player. And then you need to taunt immediately. Now you do have a bit of time. As soon as you see that giant purple triangle come out, you can taunt him and he will turn and look at you and do the knockback on you. And that's where you want to have your back positioned against one of these two objects. So basically I spend the majority of the fight. See, there it is again. Make sure that you taunt before it actually goes off, and that way you don't send anyone flying off the platform and they can stand fairly close to the boss of them. If they're melee, they would be totally fine. These purple circles, you simply move out of them. There's very little that you need to be aware of on this fight if you're using the strategy of just standing on these little pillars to prevent knockback. Again, just making sure that you taunt that boss and that people know that they're not standing where they're going to get knocked. So depending on the angle of the boss, sometimes that angle will go fairly far out into the platform and you just want to be careful there. Your teammates want to be careful. It's not your job to babysit them. Now, if you can, you ideally want the boss pointing as much as you can straight towards the outside of the platform. So, if you can position him and move him a little bit away. As you can see there, I barely taunted in time. It actually did end up doing the knockback on me, so you do have a lot of buffer there as to when you taunt to get that on you. But yeah, as I was going to say, if you move the boss a little further away from the edge of the platform, reposition him, and then bring him in, you can angle that so there's more room for your teammates. This spot here, everyone's going to get their own clone of Malgus to fight, and if you actually stack your Malgus on top of each other, you can do AoE damage and hit the other player's Malguses. I don't know if it actually does damage. People claim it does, but that's one thing you can do. You can just AoE in the same area, and you should be hitting all the clones as well as your own. And this spot, it's very simple. I'm not even really sure if it's meant to be a check or if it's just meant to be something interesting. And then you go back to fighting a single Malgus. And the mechanics really don't change too much until he does his circle. That's going to be the biggest mechanic that you want to be aware of, because it can make it really frustrating if people stand inside of his circle that spawns additional Malgus clones. So you can see the long channel there. I have no idea what that ability was for, because I'm looking at a little preview of a tiny screen right now, not looking at a full-size video. Again, didn't matter. And now we're just going back to our normal tanking. I'd like to skip ahead to make this a little bit better, but I'm just worried about, the imprecision of skipping ahead I might. Good old Guardian tanking. I really do enjoy Guardian tanking. Just something about the way the class plays and the way it feels. I just love it. Yeah, shadow tanking, there's a lot of things that I like about being able to... Oh, here you can see the circle spawning in the middle there. So everyone just has to stay out of that circle. That's the thing. So you can see he cast a really giant circle there. I got out of that one. The purple circle in the middle, you want to stay out of it because it spawns Malgus clones. So the general idea is just make sure that your knockback is always angled in such a way that if people do get knocked, they're going to get knocked along the edge of the platform. But you can see right now I've got that nice positioning where I've got him facing straight towards the outside edge of the platform, giving everybody tons of room. And you can see somebody did spawn a Malgus. Somebody else is going to spawn another Malgus. Depending on your group's DPS, sometimes it's better to just finish DPSing the boss down, or sometimes it's better to kill the Malgus spawns. It's kind of debatable. The best thing is just don't ever frickin' get a Malgus spawn. Don't stand in that giant purple circle. I'm giving my team so much room DPS, and yet they're still continuing to be like, no, I'm just going to stand wherever the fuck I want. So, yeah, you have that. Anyways, going back to shadow tanking, the rest of the fight's pretty simple now. Yeah, shadow tanking, the fact that you can use your stealth out of combat to avoid a lot of different attacks is very nice. There's a lot of things where you make it easy on your team. They don't need to know as many mechanics. We tend to call that cheesing the boss, where you basically mitigate a whole mechanic and the whole raid group doesn't have to deal with it because you can stealth out. Now, I do have Saber Reflect, which on some bosses also allows me to do a similar function of cheesing certain boss mechanics and dealing with them. But definitely defensive-wise, considering how many of the bosses do force and tech damage, it tends to be... I don't even know how I got knocked off there. So pissed about that. I thought my back was in the right spot. I was a little bit out of position. Oh well. But they killed him anyways, like 2 seconds later, so whatever. Yeah. So a lot of the bosses. Oh, back video. Oh, I see. It's just waiting for the cutscene. So a lot of the bosses, they do have force and tech damage that they deal, and Shadow's resilience, or Assassin's Shroud, I think it's called, is exceptionally good at dealing with that type of damage. So that's very important, that they have this mitigation that's they can take a utility that every time they stealth out, they get, I believe it's 5 seconds with the utility that extends the duration. And then they have resilience itself, 1 minute cooldown. So they've got this, 1 minute cooldown for defensive, and they've got to attach their stealth, which with 2 cloaks, you can have 2 charges of. So now you've got basically in a 3 minute, well, you've got a whole bunch of these options to use resilience. So considering how many bosses are profiled towards force and tech damage, they just have this really good set of defensives that they can reuse regularly, and they have a lot more defensives available in that sense, as long as it's something that resilience works on. And deflection, their big puddle that radiates out from them, that is a pretty good defensive. It's a longer cooldown. It's a standard tank cooldown, in terms of, it's got a fairly long cooldown. It does its job pretty well. 50% melee ranged, and additionally, anything that's standing inside of your pulsating puddle, 15% less damage from force and tech attack, so it still does a little bit of both damage types, so it is nice that way. But they really start to struggle in comparison in the fact that they're so heavily reliant on shielding. So they're not a heavy armor class, so they have less defense chance, and they rely heavily on shielding attacks. If you keep your kinetic ward up, you're sitting at 69, 72%, depending on how much you want to put in shielding for your shield chance. And yeah, you're going to mitigate quite a bit of damage just through shielding, but not every attack can get shielded, and you're still having potentially a 20% chance of not shielding. And shadow tanks are very squishy when they do not successfully shield, and you really notice it, either as the healer or as the tank. If you're versed in playing both, you do notice how your health just sometimes just suddenly disappears when you're not expecting it as a shadow tank, when you're not using defensives as a result. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're thinking about, shadow tanking versus guardian tanking. That's one of the things that really kind of sets them apart, is it's a very different playstyle. Guardian tank is much more forgiving in the sense of being that bigger, bulkier guy. He's got the heavy armor. And of course, Vanguard tanks also have that heavy armor, so they've got that high defense chance, which makes it a lot easier for them to continue just take damage to the face without having to specifically always be using defensives to mitigate. Now, Guardian and Vanguard differ quite a bit because they're both heavy armor, but Vanguard, they don't have as many good defensives. So if you don't get emergency power, you don't have a defensive that can just completely mitigate damage at all. You don't get a saber reflect, you don't get a stealth out of combat, you don't get a resilience. So you're really left with looking at, I believe it's called power yield, is kind of as you take damage, you build up more defensive against melee and ranged attacks. When you activate your battle focus, I believe, which is also an offensive cooldown, you get 25% damage reduction, so that's going to be your main defensive ability. And then you've got your active shield, which I believe is also 25% DR. So you've got that, and then what you've got is a bunch of other little things that add up. So you've got your smoke screen, which reduces the accuracy, I believe, so less chance of getting hit, and especially piled with your defense chance, it adds up to a lot. You've got set bonus tactical stuff. And most importantly, you gain a lot of defensive ability just from doing your rotation correctly. So you've got your off GCD ability, I forget what it's called, generates a lot of threat. And it also provides a defense chance, I think something like 10% or something. I don't know, it adds up. And then you've got a bunch of things that really boost your shield and absorb chance. So in general, you end up having a class that doesn't have any real strong single defensives in terms of, mitigating the really big attacks, but you tend to have a lot of just flat mitigation. So you do lots of shielding while having the heavy armor with the higher defense chance. You have ways to reduce the accuracy or the damage that the enemies are dealing, and you still have some defensives on top of that. Most of your defensives come up quite frequently in comparison. So yeah, it's just one of those playstyles where it's like, there are certain boss mechanics where they're not a well-suited tank. You have to be quite skilled at tanking to be able to do that, or your team just has to be really good at dealing with fights and mechanics. So they're definitely a viable tank. It's just a very different playstyle. You know, Shadow's very much focused on being like, I can cheese things really well with my stealth out of combat, my resilience, and then I want to shield stuff. And yeah, I tend to need a bit more healing. Guardian's kind of in the middle. Guardian has some very strong defensives to use with the right timing. They've got that cheese when Saber Reflect is applicable, and they've got that heavy armor, and they've got some passives that help reduce the damage taken. So generally, you know, they're taking fairly light damage throughout the fight, and they've got some defensives they can time to do some really well timed damage mitigation. Whereas Vanguard is kind of like, yeah, I just mitigate all the time, and I've got some defensives that help with that. But you know, unless you're rocking emergency power, nothing super crazy good. But they're all strong enough to be able to add up to mitigating strong boss fights. You know, if you save a couple defensives together, one of your smaller like 10%, 15% plus 25% or 20%, yeah, it's going to add up to be enough that you're not going to die to a big attack from a boss. And they've got, you know, it's interesting too, like Guardian and Shadow both have a mechanic to do a push, but the Vanguard has a pull instead. And there's no self cleanse on a Vanguard, which is definitely can be a downside on some fights. But they do have Hold the Line. Hold the Line is exceptionally useful and exceptionally fun. Now, Guardian tanks do have the unremitting tactical, where they can leap in and gain immunity to knockbacks for 4 seconds, which can be really fun to cheese certain mechanics. So, yeah, you know, every tank class has things that are enjoyable about it, I would say. You know, I still find that overall, though, I really like Guardian. I like the simplicity of the rotation just being, you know, I can set up my bar to basically say I always want to click from left to right. They struggle with AoE, and I actually enjoy that about them. The challenge of trying to hold threat on multiple enemies as a Guardian tank is something that I enjoy. On a Shadow tank, it's just mindless. You just spam AoE abilities. That's all you really do. You use a pull to bring somebody in, use a taunt to bring somebody else in, you know, gather them up and just spam AoE. So I don't find it that satisfying. It's not as enjoyable of a style to play. And I like the animations on Guardian quite a bit. Whereas Vanguard's also really fun toolkit, but I do find that some of the attacks are a little bit annoying. How you have to position them around an enemy around instead of yourself, like your AOE taunt, and some of your AOE abilities are positioned on an enemy, which can be a huge advantage for bringing enemies together, grouping them up, getting threat on a group. But yeah, it's kind of like it's interesting. You know, I would say that uh, much as I don't play Vanguard tank, it's pretty cool the way that it plays. But just have the soft spot for Guardian. Definitely prefer them. And man, it's so satisfying when you get to pull off a Saber Reflect. I find pulling off a Saber Reflect way more satisfying than actually doing a Shadow stealth out of combat, especially when you look at something like Explosive Conflict. If you're doing the Stormcaller tank and you're reflecting and your damage is getting up there to like 5.5, 6k DPS in that raid, oh, it's so satisfying when you're able to get like an extra 2k DPS from your reflect. So, anyways, that was Objective Meridian turned into a bit of a rant talking about my tanking classes, my thoughts on them, because why the hell not? So, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll show you a little bit more of my nice drone footage there. Um, there we go. So we'll finish this off with a bit of drone footage. This was out by Vancouver Island. So, well, I shouldn't say by. This was on Vancouver Island. We went up north to Telegraph Cove. We wanted to do some kayaking and some boat tours to look for some whales. Sadly, my gimbal has a bit of an issue. I think it's because I did have a little bit of a crash once or twice with it, like just a 3-foot drop, but still, I've always had problems with my gimbal tilting out of control like this as it's flying, and then if I stop flying for a bit, it tends to like re-level itself. Anyways, yeah, little community here. They're basically just a few people here who do some fishing, and then the rest is just tourism, and a few rich people have summer homes here. They can come live in when the weather's nice and then fuck off for the rest of the year. So they've got the one marina here. And so, yeah, quite a few of the boats are either fishing or for the touring companies. And then they've got all the historical buildings left over because this was originally set up as a fishing community. Whereas now, you know, the tourism for coming up here to watch for whales and stuff is quite a big thing. All right, well, that's it for the video. As always, have a great day and we'll see you in the next video.